All right. So, hi, welcome. I haven't recorded a YouTube video in a really long time, but we've been getting so many questions and so many women inside our functional medicine case evaluations that are interested in or wanting food sensitivities. Typically, it's one of the very first, it's one of the very first tests that people want when they come to us with any digestive issues, any concerns with nutrition, or even if they're just women that are searching for, hey, how do I optimize my nutrition? How do I eat in a way that's best for me? They typically go straight for food sensitivities, or I feel like I have food sensitivities, or I want to know what my food sensitivities are so I can just like avoid them completely. And so I really want to address food sensitivities, difference between food sensitivities, food allergies, but then also food sensitivity testing, why we don't usually recommend it, and the exceptions to that rule, as well as what kind of food sensitivity tests we look for, and then talking about really like how to optimize your nutrition, how to optimize your gut health without necessarily using food sensitivity. So before we dive into all of that, and this will most likely be a two-part video because there's a lot to unpack with food sensitivities and gut health in general. But before we jump into food sensitivity testing and all of that jazz and the differences and immune responses and all of that good stuff, I want to talk to you about if you are somebody that genuinely believes they have a food sensitivity or they are genuinely interested in food sensitivity testing. I want to talk about what you should consider before you get to food sensitivity testing, or eliminating foods or going on some restrictive diet. Food sensitivities are real. They're a very real thing. People definitely suffer from them. They can definitely pour gasoline on the fire of inflammation that is happening in the body. All those things are true. But what tends to be also true is that the majority of women experiencing digestive issues actually just have a reduced digestive capability or capacity, not necessarily food sensitivities. And so we need to be addressing digestive capacity before we even start to look at food sensitivities. So what I'm going to do today, right now, first, is basically allow you guys to put yourself into category. Are you somebody that actually is at the point where they need food sensitivity testing? And that's really going to be the thing that's going to move the needle and make healing possible. Or are you somebody that really just needs to address digestive capacity, capability first, and then see where you fall as far as your symptoms are concerned, and leading into food sensitivity testing. So that's what I want to do first. So I'm going to give you guys some ways that you can figure out exactly where you fall, where you should start, and how to help improve your digestive capability and capacity first. Some practical ways that you can actually apply today to help you do these things. And so that way you actually know if you do need that food sensitivity testing, if that will actually help, or if what you really just needed was to improve digestion. So we're going to start there. I think that's actually, whether or not you know you need it, it's probably the best place to start. So I know if you came really searching for answers on food sensitivities, we are going to get there too, but this is the best place to start. And I'm just telling you that as someone that's been doing this for years. Okay, so if things aren't working digestion works from top down. So if things aren't working at the top, starting here where you put food into your mouth, you're going to have issues with digestion all the way down to your stomach, to that microbiome, to your gut, to your butt. And so guys, a whole connected system. So if things aren't working at the top, they're not going to work for you at the bottom. So one of the the big players, one of the most important players to proper digestion is actually having proper stomach acid and proper amount of stomach acid. Stomach acid is so important for digestion and absorption of key minerals and nutrients that you need from like a cellular level for optimal hormone health, gut health, thyroid, all of the things that you think are out of balance actually starts with digestion and absorption. So if you don't have proper stomach acid, this is the very first place that you're going to start. So ways to evaluate if you are somebody that is actually struggling with stomach acid production or lowered stomach acid. The gut should be acidic. It should be a highly acidic place. It should not be alkaline. So ways to decide or figure out if you are low in stomach acid. So do you have tongue inflammation? That's a really good indication. Do you have an iron deficiency, or have you been diagnosed anemic in any capacity? Do you have undigested food in your stool? So when you go to the bathroom, do you tend to see food particles in your stool? Do you have bloating after eating? Do you have gas after eating? Do you get prolonged fullness? So you eat a meal and you just feel full for a really long time. And even if you go past like 5, 6, 7 hours, I typically see this with women. They eat breakfast and they're not hungry until dinner time. And they're like, why? This could be a really good indication that you aren't producing enough stomach acid to actually break down the food that you're eating. So it's sitting in your stomach for longer periods of time, creating that feeling of fullness. Do you have any indigestion, heartburn? Do you have acne, hair loss? These are actually all symptoms of, yes, low stomach acid, because if you don't have the stomach acid, you don't have the ability to absorb the nutrients necessary for these processes to be working appropriately, and there's a huge connection between gut and skin, and then also hair loss. Do you have a parasite? Are you prone to things like candida, SIBO, yeast infections, those types of things? That's all indication that you could have a stomach acid issue. So like I said, our GI tract, our digestive, our stomach, our gut should be very acidic. It should not be alkaline. And we need that acidity in order to prevent pathogens, in order to break down our food. If the gut's not properly, or if the gut doesn't have that acid, it basically creates a situation and an environment that's super welcoming for pathogens, parasites, and dysbiosis. So we have opportunistic bacteria in the gut. And if you don't have that stomach acid, it just creates this very welcoming environment for those opportunistic bacteria to overgrow, push out the good bacteria that we need, and create that dysbiosis. And the other really cool thing is that our healthy gut bacteria actually creates its own acid in the form of short chain fatty acids. So if you don't have enough of that healthy bacteria, you also are, in turn cutting down your body's ability to produce even more of the acid that it needs. And short chain fatty acids are extremely important for gut health, gut intestinal permeability, or like that leaky gut. And so short chain fatty acids are crucial, and you can actually help build up those healthy bacteria and build up their ability to produce that acid for their stomach by increasing your intake of short chain fatty acids as well. So things like eating unripe or green bananas, cooked and cooled potatoes, cooked and cooled rice, cooked and cooled pastas, some beans, fruit that has skin, so apples, pears, those are all great short chain fatty acids that you can include more of in your diet in order to help aid that healthy bacteria. Another really big symptom, and touched on it for a second, is the skin. So skin, there is a huge gut-skin connection. I'm not going to go into that today because it'll take it's a whole other YouTube video. But things like rosacea, acne, eczema, psoriasis, dermatitis, the hives even, can all be really big clues to us that we have low stomach acid and low digestive capability. So if you're experiencing any of these symptoms that I listed and you're thinking that it's a food sensitivity, but you haven't addressed stomach acid, start with stomach acid. Start here. Start with building up your stomach acid production, including more short chain fatty acids in your diet. I'm going to go through some other ways to help support stomach acid production, and see if you have an improvement of all of these symptoms first before you go starting to eliminate restrictive diets, spend hundreds of dollars on testing, because this is really your first place to start. So like I said, ways to promote stomach acid production. These are very simple, natural ways you can do today. Number one, increase those short chain fatty acids. It's a great place to start. Number two, you can actually start to promote your own stomach's ability to produce that acid by lemon juice or apple cider vinegar. So doing 1 to 2 tablespoons of either lemon juice or apple cider vinegar inside water before every meal, not snacks, just big meals. So breakfast, lunch, dinner, will help you produce that acid. And we want to do it about 15 minutes before we're actually going to eat. The biggest issue that we see with this type of intervention is people just forgetting to do it. It does take a lot of habit building and consistency in order to remember to do this. However, like when you're out, or if you're at a restaurant, or even if you're just at home, I think it's really easy to just grab some lemon, squeeze it in there, lemon juice, squeeze it in your water, drink it, and then eat a meal. And this shouldn't be something that you have to do forever. We're just trying to retrain the body to produce that stomach acid that it needs for all of those functions that I already talked about. So that's a really great way. Another thing that you can do is actually increase your intake of bitter foods. And so you can get this in tincture forms. So there are tincture forms where you would do the same thing as the lemon juice or the apple cider vinegar. You'd just mix it into some water, drink it 15 minutes before you eat a meal. That's one way to do it. There's also foods that are highly bitter that can help promote natural stomach acid production as well, and also bile, which I'm going to talk about in a second, with things like dandelion tea, tahini, coriander, cruciferous vegetables, dark chocolate. Those are all bitter foods that you can introduce more of in your diet. I will say with cruciferous vegetables, something to keep in mind is that if you do already have reduced digestive capacity, it may be those types of vegetables are very hard on the digestive tract. It does take a lot to break them down. And while they're very liver supportive, which is important for this, which I'll talk about in a little bit, they may be best cooked for the time being as you're working through building up some of these processes. Another thing that's super important for stomach acid production is actually chewing your food. Shocker. This can be one of the most simple, basic, seems like it won't do anything, lifestyle change that actually produces the most benefit. And basically with chewing your food, digestion begins in the mouth. So that triggers stomach acid production, bile production, and gets those kind of juices flowing so that you're able to absorb the food that you are actually eating. And this doesn't just mean sitting and chewing your food and counting, okay, I'm going to chew my food 30 times before I swallow. Yes, that's super important, making sure you're not swallowing big chunks of food. But typically we do this naturally when we're not eating distracted, so eating in front of phones, TVs, etc. We do this naturally when we're not eating on the go, when we're actually sitting down and having a meal and enjoying the food that's in front of us. We tend to chew our food thoroughly without having to count or think about it. And then also something else that helps is if we, like I said, if we're consuming any liquid about 15 minutes before we eat, and actually during our meal, that we limit the amount of liquids that we're consuming, because that will dilute the stomach acid that's being produced while we eat. And then also that's helping break down your food. So that can also be a very big help. Simple change that you can make to help increase your stomach production. The other thing is avoiding grazing in between meals. So a lot of the times, if we're like big snackers or we're not consciously thinking about our food in any kind of intentional way, we're not giving the stomach enough time to actually build up acid in between meals. So avoiding grazing in between meals can be also beneficial to aiding stomach acid production. And then another, and probably the last thing, is chronic stress does suppress stomach acid. So some things to actually promote getting into that place of rest and digest before you eat is doing things like diaphragmatic breathing. So breathing deep into your nose, even just 3 times, they've seen benefits to being able to properly digest your food. That's going to come back around when we talk about bile production as well. And then also just considering throughout the day, like instead of adding more things to your plate in order to reduce stress, that we actually look at our priorities, what we're doing, job, what we're taking on. Are we setting boundaries? What are things that we can do to actually take things off of our plate and reduce stress where possible, can be really beneficial, as well as doing things to promote internal reduction of stress, which would be things like blood sugar support, which is a huge stressor on the body. So chronic stress definitely plays a part in all of this as well. So those are some basic things that you can start to do right now to help your stomach acid production, and then in turn help increase your digestive capacity before you even get to food sensitivity testing. And if you are working with a practitioner, this is where they should begin. Because once you get into food sensitivity testing and you start eliminating foods or taking foods out or any of those things, if you haven't first addressed digestion, eliminating certain foods aren't going to help with the overall picture. You're still going to struggle with those things because the foods that you are eating are still going to be causing digestive distress. So consider starting there. Some other things that may help with stomach acid production might be some supplementation. So oftentimes practitioners will recommend HCl with pepsin. HCl is stomach acid, and then with pepsin, it is a certain type of supplement. It's really important that you discuss this with a practitioner before you take them, because they do interact with certain medical or certain medications, and then also if you have certain medical conditions, these are not a great option for you. But it is something, and it is a tool that we can utilize. And with HCl supplements, you actually want to, again, absorption of minerals, especially vitamin B12, which is super important for metabolism and creating red blood cells and all of those good things. So we also need it in order for bile to be released, and for us to be able to digest fat. And then also HCl is necessary for pancreas enzyme release, which helps break down carbs, fats, proteins, all of the things. So yes, so super important, and we can use HCl with pepsins to help with that. My dog. Go. Okay, so when considering an HCl supplement, we always want to take it with meals. So unlike some of the other digestive support that we're doing more naturally without supplementation, where you would do it before you eat 15 minutes, with HCl supplementation, you want to actually take it with food while you're eating, and then you're going to build up pills. So you'll start with 1, the next day you'd add 2, so on and so forth, until you start to get kind of that warm feeling, I guess, in your stomach. And whatever pill amount that you're at, when you feel that, you actually want to go down one pill, and then that would be your dose. So if you get that feeling at 4 pills before a meal or with a meal, then you want to actually go down to 3, and that would be your proper dose. So yes, so that's with HCl. But again, you want to work with a practitioner too to make sure that that's an appropriate solution for you. There are also things like digestive enzymes. Now, digestive enzymes are the things that are produced by the pancreas in order to break down carbs, fats, proteins. You need HCl in order for the pancreas to actually release those enzymes, but sometimes we can have a reduced digestive enzyme capability as well. So it is secondary to HCl, but it is something to consider if you are experiencing these things. So with digestive enzymes, if you're having an issue with that process particularly, again, you're going to get that feeling, prolonged fullness. You might have nausea after you eat. You're going to have maybe mucus in your stool, and then bloating, gas. So those things they pretty much tend to go hand in hand with HCl, because if you have low HCl, you'll probably have digestive enzyme issues as well. But sometimes we can address things just with digestive enzymes. So you always want to start with HCl first and then add enzymes second if you're still experiencing some of those symptoms. The last thing that we can do to help promote our digestive capacity is bile and bile production. So I don't think we talk about bile enough when in functional medicine or talking about gut health. And basically, we need bile in order to break down fat that we eat, and then also fat-soluble vitamins, A, K, D, and E. Super important vitamins, vital in vitamins. If we're deficient in those, we have really big functionality issues that can result in all sorts of disease, hormone imbalances, thyroid, all sorts of stuff. So bile is actually very, 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 very important. Bile is made in the liver. So I think it doesn't get addressed as enough when talking about gut health. So bile is made in the liver, and it's released by the gallbladder. So if you are somebody, and gallbladder surgery is becoming more and more popular because of all of these digestive issues and people's reduced ability for digestion. But if you've had your gallbladder removed or your function is impaired due to things like SIBO, overgrowth, infections, so on and so forth, you will have a depletion in fat-soluble vitamins. So those A, D, K, and E. And some of the symptoms of decreased gallbladder function, or again, if you've had your gallbladder removed, super important organ, you're going to have an inability to tolerate fat. You'll probably experience nausea after eating fat. And this is like healthy fat too. We're not talking about just like processed foods, although that's a huge contributor. But burping, like if you're somebody who's taking a fish oil or has had a fish oil before and you burp after that, or burp after consuming a lot of fat, that's a big indication of bile production being low. Another thing is you have like floaty, greasy, loose stool that's maybe yellowish in color or clay-like. That's an indication of low bile production. Dry skin. Dry skin is huge. So this is actually an indication as well of vitamin A deficiency. But as I just stated, if you're not producing enough bile, you cannot, or you don't have the ability to absorb and break down those fat-soluble vitamins, which A is included in that. So having dry skin is typically an indication that you also have a bile production issue. And then also hormone imbalances. So you actually need fat and cholesterol in order to make hormones. So if you have an intolerance to that fat, you can't break down fat, metabolize fat, you will end up with hormonal imbalances down the road. So bile is super important for that. If you're having any upper back or pain between your shoulders, that's a really good indication that that you do have a bile production or gallbladder function issue. So ways we can actually support bile production is through supporting the liver. So you'll support the gallbladder, you'll support bile through liver support, which again, this is why I think we don't address it enough in gut health, but it is a part of your digestive capabilities, because we're talking about our ability to actually digest and absorb the nutrients from the foods that we're eating that are causing some of those digestive symptoms that a lot of people mistake for food sensitivities. So this is one of them. So ways to support bile production is actually through supporting the liver. So because bile is made in the liver, we want to do things to reduce the burden that the liver can sometimes be under in our current environment. So alcohol, processed foods, things like excessive coffee intake, not necessarily prioritizing organic foods when you can, limiting your toxin exposure as far as cleaning products, beauty products, laundry detergent, things that are in our environment that we do have control over. We can try to reduce toxin exposure as much as possible and reduce the burden that the liver feels, especially if it's having issue producing that bile. We may need to go into a period of time in our life where we're really focused on reducing liver burden. Some other things I talked about before, but those bitter foods can be really liver supportive. So dandelion, milk thistle. There's some other foods like beetroots, berries, ginseng is one of my favorites. Really cool thing about ginseng. It's liver supportive, it's bile supportive, but it's also cellular. From a cellular energy standpoint, it can be very supportive for creating cellular energy in the body. So if you're experiencing kind of that chronic fatigue, or a slowdown in metabolism, ginseng is a great option for you as well as being super liver supportive, which is an awesome bonus. Again, coming back to diaphragmatic breathing, when you breathe through, a lot of people these days, we're really shallow breathers. We're mouth breathers. We're breathing through the mouth. It's also breathing through the mouth like that is a stress response. A lot of us are under a lot of chronic stress when we're breathing through the mouth. So if you think about when you're exercising, right, when your body is in that state of stress, controlled stress, you're trying to catch your breath. What are we doing? We're not deep breathing through the nose. A lot of us are like huffing and puffing through the mouth. But it's interesting how so many of us now are actually living life breathing through the mouth in that stress response. So closing your mouth, learning to breathe through the nose and deeply into the diaphragm, not only can switch our brain into that rest and digest capability, but also it ends up being very massaging for the liver. So when you breathe into your diaphragm, you think about where your liver is actually situated. You end up massaging that liver and stimulating bile. So it's, that type of deep breathing, and especially right before you eat or a few minutes before you eat, even just taking a few deep breaths can be really beneficial for your digestive support. And then the last thing would be, again, we'll come back to stress, but stress hormones that are produced by the adrenals. Cortisol, especially, it gets trapped in the liver. The liver is what processes out any of those excess hormones, cortisol, adrenaline, estrogen, anything that our body doesn't need, it gets processed out through the liver. So if cortisol gets trapped in the liver, there's no way for it to make its way out with bile. That can be a huge burden on the liver. And again, so we want to figure out how to manage our stress, whether that is becoming more resilient to it through nutrition and blood sugar, or taking things off of our plate, really looking at our life, learning where to set boundaries. All of these things are super important for digestive function. And again, it might have nothing to do with being sensitive to certain foods. So that all in all, I want you guys to know all of those things, because if you can address those things and see improvement in symptoms and improve your digestive capability, we don't ever have to go down the road of food sensitivity. That's huge because food sensitivities are, they're not fun. They do sometimes, it is sometimes necessary to eliminate foods, restrict certain things. It can be a longer healing process. It gets more convoluted and all of that. So it's not something you want to just jump into, especially when we already are a society too that is so anxious, and we have a lot of anxiety and food fear, which again does not help with digestive issues. If we demonize food, we're already setting ourselves up for a stress response before we even eat the food. So food sensitivity testing is not where I would begin. But it is real. It is something that we need to address. It is something that we need to be conscious of and looking at. And there are ways to do that from a functional standpoint that are really beneficial, that limit the downsides to dealing with and addressing food sensitivities. So I think that what I'm going to do is pause here and do part 2 on the ins and outs of food sensitivity testing. For those of you that feel like you don't fall in this digestive capacity bucket, and it really, really is a food sensitivity issue. So we're going to go down that path in part 2. So stay tuned.